Living in Bell Gardens in the early 90s, I remember hearing stories about gangs from yesteryear that used to roam the city. Being that Bell Gardens is a predominantly Hispanic city nowadays, the two gangs that stood out the most to me were the Ford Park Posse and the Bell Gardens White Boys. Yes, there were actually white people in Bell Gardens at one time, folks. I decided to go down a rabbit hole and dig up as much info as I could about these gangs and other gangs that used to hang in the city of Bell Gardens. I'm also looking to interview anyone who was part of the Bell Gardens White Boys or the Ford Park Posse. So if that is you, please DM me on Instagram at dustyvisiontv or dustyvisiontv on Facebook. And before I get started, I want to thank the Facebook groups Memories of Bell Gardens and You Know You Grew Up in Bell Gardens When for assisting me in my research. And please post below in the comment section, what do you remember about growing up in the city of Bell Gardens? It wasn't all bad. Richard says, played basketball almost every night at John Anson Ford Park. Yeah, Richard, when I was coming up in the early 90s, gang activity was at an all-time high in LA County, so we hardly ever played at the park past sundown. I do remember, though, the generation before me telling me that they used to play basketball, football, and even fish at the lake all hours of the night. Sadly, you can't really do that anywhere in LA County anymore. Steve says, I was one of the founding members of the Bell Gardens White Boys back in the day. Steve, I would love to speak with you. Please, please, please check your DM or DM me on Dusty Vision TV, Instagram, or Facebook. Ruben Calderon says, we used to pop and breakdance at Ford Park back in the early 80s. Free lunches and swimming. Oh, man, I remember free lunches. Good times. You're taking me back, Ruben. Ford Park was one of my favorite parks to go swimming at on a hot, sunny day. I think it costed like $0.25 back when I was a kid. Me and a couple of my buddies would ride the city tram from one part of the town to the other. And one of my favorite memories was after swimming, we would go to the burger stand that was right down the street. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they had the best fries. Big old bag of fries for only like $1. Good times, good times. Stephen Wyatt, speaking of Ford Park Posse, back in the day, we had the Bell Gardens Locos, Brown Neighborhood, 18th Street, BG White Boys, Playboys. That was back in the 70s, so they must have started later than that. Yeah, Stephen, very little info is online about Ford Park Posse, so I don't know when they were established and when they became defunct. But hopefully I can get those questions answered. Benny the Butcher, says, don't forget King Kobras. Oh, yeah, I remember seeing King Kobras hit up everywhere back in the day. Jamie says Ford Park Posse was around in the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, Jamie, that was definitely the time I lived in Bell Gardens. And definitely hoping to get more information for you guys. Manuel says they would hang out by the bridge on the riverbed. That bridge is not there anymore. I think I think that's Foster Bridge, right? I think you are true. I remember hearing about that as a kid as well. Armando says King Kobras, Bell Gardens Locos, Brown Neighborhood, BG White Boys, Playboys. Ford Park Posse came later. WES, Clara Street Locos, etc. I remember WES and Clara Street. For sure. We didn't go down Clara Street, man. I was from the other side of Bell Gardens, over there by Lubeck. Julia says, I've seen some of their graffiti, but never encountered them that I'm aware of. Richie Mendez says, Junior Mafia. Yep, I remember Junior Mafia. I even remember when the rap group Junior Mafia came out, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird because we have a Junior Mafia gang right here in Bell Gardens. Hearing Biggie Smalls talk about Junior Mafia, but, it all makes sense now. Michael says the Trevino brothers were part of them and Mike D. Michael, if you could tell me more about the Trevino brothers and Mike D, I'd really appreciate it, my man. Juan says Ford Park Posse was a party crew at first. They hanged out on Scout in Bell Gardens. One of my homies that actually did time for shooting Bleedy, one of their OGs. No bullshit. They were deep mofos, though. Okay. Thank you for that information, Juan. And if you have any more, please reach out. Michael Alcala says, I remember these two guys being from Fort Park Posse, Locos, Beaver and Red. I remember them. They got into Bell Gardens Locos over the years back in the early 90s. Chris Wayne says, I lived across the street from Fort Park for some years until my teens. I hung out at Fort Park almost every day. I kicked it with UEC tagging crew and NTS 13. I remember NTS. I remember when NTS didn't even have the 13 on the end. Notorious tagging crew back in the day. Wow. And I tried not to get too involved. Guess I never ran into Fort Park Posse. I did hear about them, though. This was like late 80s, early 90s when shit was real bad. I ran into a lot of different gangs in Bell Gardens because I also lived on Florence Place. Shit, Bell Gardens was like a war zone back then. It's so crazy how some people don't know about that life. Growing up in it, I just thought it was a part of normal life until I moved. I've seen some crazy shit in all them years. Lots of shit. People getting jacked, jumped for being in the wrong hood, shootings, and everyday norms. I seen one guy, get jumped, and he was stomped out by 5 people. Didn't nobody do anything. I was only like 10 years old. Most of my family still lives there. So many memories, good and bad. I lived through it. I'm 39 now. Damn, Chris, thank you for sharing that, man. Yeah, it looks like you and I grew up in Bell Gardens pretty much around the same time, or lived there at least around the same time. And yeah, like you said, those times were crazy. I mean, LA County is not nearly as bad as it was back in the early, the late 80s, early 90s. But sadly, it seems like we're going back to those days.